Okay. Hey, hello, hello, hello. My name is Randy Joe, and let's get this show on the road. That's a little ditty I wrote for you. But anyway, today we're talking about books, which if you're subscribed to me for my music-related content, then you can click off this video because this is about books this time. And I will be doing more book-related content going forward as well as music-related content, so you get the best of both worlds. Maybe eventually we'll do TV shows and maybe even classic art of some sort. I don't know. This channel can go in any direction. But even still, I'm going to go ahead and talk about every book I read in 2020 and rank them in order from my least favorite that I read to my most favorite. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump right into it. According to Goodreads, I read a total of 16 books, which is lower than what I initially was hoping to do, but still I did reach my goal of just 15. But even still, some of these are from a series, so ultimately this really leads to 12 books that I'm going to talk about because I'm just condensing a series into one in this list. So coming at my 12th spot is Down and Out in Paris and London by George Orwell, which I really wanted to like and I was trying to force myself to enjoy, and it doesn't help that I read this during a 24-hour reading challenge with my friend, and at that point I was extremely tired, so I didn't really get maybe everything out of this like I should have, but even still, I found much of what I read from this, of what I was at least able to grasp in my tired state, to be very boring and repetitive of things that I already got out of The Road to Wigan Pier by George Orwell, which in my opinion is a much superior sort of version of this. But basically the point of this book is that George Orwell throughout the 20s lived through a lot of poverty, and in this book he details the living conditions of someone in poverty and the sort of life that these kind of people would live throughout Paris and London in these true low points of their lives, just really struggling to get by. And this really leads to some really interesting stories and looking into a lifestyle that a lot of people really haven't lived before, this true hard to get by lifestyle. And a lot of it is written in almost like an essay-like fashion, kind of teaching you a moral lesson while at the same time showing you through the eyes of George Orwell how it really was. So if that sounds like something interesting to you, then you might enjoy this, but in my opinion, The Road to Wigan Pier by George Orwell was far more interesting and sort of tackled similar topics, although venturing more into the life of a man who works in the mines at the time. 5 out of 10. In the 11th spot is The Never-Ending Story by Michael Ende. I don't know how to pronounce his last name, and I'm probably butchering it. But even still, this book is fantastic for the first half. And I specifically want to specify that because the second half, I really had to push myself through to the end because the story pretty much completely changes from the second half onward. If you don't know what this book is about, then I will quickly sum it up for you. Bastian, this young, awkward boy, reads a book in an attic and is then transported into this world of Fantastica, which is this beautiful fantasy world that is just so full of magic and wonder, and it is extremely well written to the point that you can really just fully immerse yourself into this world. The issue I have with this book is that the first half of this book is dealing with this boy from Fantastica named Atreyu, who is far more interesting than the main character who is reading the book, Bastian. And that's important to note because in the second half of this book, Bastian's tale really overrides Atreyu's and takes over, and it gets to the point where it is just a far less enjoyable story once Bastian is involved. He is just a power-hungry, awkward, and unlikable protagonist for the most part, and Atreyu's story in the first half of the book is far more interesting than any part, or any page, I should say, of Bastian's story. And so for me personally, I really enjoyed a majority of this book, but it really does go downhill from the second half onward, I would say. 7 out of 10. Coming in at the 10th spot is A Clockwork Orange by Anthony Burgess, which I read as part of a book club that I did with a group of my friends, and this was the only book that we read in the book club before it all fell apart. We went with something pretty thin to start, but I guess the material of it was much heavier than what some of my friends were expecting, as it is written in a fictional slang called Nadstat and takes place in this world and really delves into the concept of free will. a concept that I really enjoy and is actually going to show up in one of my books later in this video. But going back to Clockwork Orange, I think the character here, Alex, is a very unlikable character, but unlikable in a good way. Obviously, if you've seen the movie, you would know just how brutal this book can be. Burgess really doesn't hold back at all with the extremities of Alex's mind, and honestly, it is a very engaging and disturbing read from start to finish. Alex goes on to commit acts of rape, torture, and murder throughout this entire thing, and it is extremely detailed and disturbing, but written in this incredibly unique slang language that really transports you to this sort of world and dystopian world that is being created here. My only issue with this book really is the ending, which I won't spoil, but personally I think the ending is just a huge letdown and really diverts away from the message of the book in a lot of ways. But again, short read, dystopian, disturbing, really great throughout. 8 out of 10. Coming in at number 9 is Stephen King's Misery, a story in which a character who is very much like Stephen King, a writer, is kidnapped by an obsessive fan and forced to write a book from the main series that this writer is refusing to write anymore. He's pretty much ended it, and she's now forcing him to write the next novel in the series despite the fact that it's over. And honestly, as far as Stephen King goes, this is one of his better works for sure. It is pretty famous. I mean, you've definitely heard of the movie or at least seen scenes from it. The book is far better than the movie. I'll say that right now. It is gruesome and disturbing. It really doesn't hold back from the violence when it gets to those points. Stephen King really does slowly build up the tension throughout this whole story, and honestly, when it hits its climax, it is really edge of your seat kind of writing. The only problem with this book is that there are entire chapters dedicated to Paul Sheldon's writing, Paul Sheldon being the main character, of course, and his writing is being pretty much retold as if you were reading his story as a manuscript. And the reason I don't like this is because it really just detracts from the story and isn't at all beneficial. I mean, there really isn't anything to gain from these chapters, and you could really go ahead and skim them because, again, they don't add to the main plot whatsoever, other than maybe giving you a bit of insight into how Paul Sheldon might think as a writer, which honestly, who really cares about that? At the end of the day, you just want to see a dude get tortured, pretty much. I'd go ahead and give this like an 8 out of 10. Number 8, this one is No Longer Human by what the fuck's his name? Osamu Dazai, which I'm probably mispronouncing that. I apologize, but this is a pretty depressing read, honestly, maybe one of the most depressing things I have ever read. And to summarize this book real quick, it is a semi-autobiographical book about the writer and about his very sad, long, drawn-out life and how he never really truly felt like he ever really belonged. It starts from the beginning of his childhood and about how he pretty much pretended and put on faces and acts to try to fit in, despite the fact that he never really felt like he really did fit in at all. And this goes all the way up into his adulthood, up into his marriage, up into all the women he meets, and it really entangles in all these different depressing and dark love stories. And the way this book ends is also extremely depressing because the author actually committed suicide shortly after publishing this. This was his final work and really does feel like more of a manifesto of sorts and more of like a goodbye suicide letter, but a very long one at that, at about 200 pages or so. This thing is extremely detailed and really puts you into the mindset of this dark, depressive, and just consuming sort of personality that was this writer, and in many ways is extremely relatable. And I think most people will understand the perspective of this writer because honestly, everyone has these dark thoughts at some point in their life, and it's unfortunate that the writer was eventually consumed by them. 8 out of 10 as well. Coming in at the 7th place, How Music Works by David Byrne. If you don't know who David Byrne is, he is the singer of Talking Heads, the band from the late 70s to early 80s. And this book really just delves into the development of Talking Heads, how they formed the band, and ultimately how David Byrne approaches music and his sort of process with understanding music to this day. At the time of recording this, David Byrne is about 68 years old, I believe, and so you really do get quite a bit of material out of here because he did start in his early 20s. And so this whole book really delves into just every side of the industry. He breaks down the price of making certain albums. He breaks down self-releasing music. He talks about live music and how important live music is, which is pivotal to Talking Heads if you are a fan of their work. And on top of that, it is just a very interesting look into David Byrne's sort of mindset, this very strange mindset that he has, but also is a great read to understand music and really just fully understand the industry in general. I got this as a Secret Santa gift from a stranger online, so thank you to that random stranger, because this is one of my favorite books I read from 2020. It was just truly a very interesting and inspiring read overall. So again, if you're a fan of Talking Heads, for my music fans that are subscribed to the channel, please check this one out. It is fantastic. 9 out of 10. At the beginning of the video, I mentioned a couple of series that I had read throughout 2020, and I will be condensing those into individual books. And this is the first of which that I want to talk about, which is Vagabond by Takehiko Inoue, which is a manga. And this manga delves into the life of the famous samurai from the 1600s known as Miyamoto Musashi. If you are a fan of samurai movies, then this is definitely something for you, as it is just full of samurai fights drawn in just absolutely gorgeous detail. The motion of these fights feels very real and almost cinematic in a way throughout this entire manga, which these editions alone spans over 12 volumes that I have the entirety of. And I read this whole thing and was just so consumed by the beauty of this world. It's very philosophical and very deep, and really does a lot more than offer up just fantastic samurai fights. There's so much to get out of these 12 volumes, and is definitely one of the best mangas I have ever read, period. It is up there with the works of Berserk, and the art is definitely on par with that series as well. So I would definitely say check out Vagabond if you're looking for a great manga, because this is definitely one of the best. This gets a 9 out of 10. The only thing stopping it from getting a 10 is that it's not finished. It's been on hiatus since 2015, so please, if the writer can get back on that, that would be great. I don't have the book for the next one that I'm talking about, but coming in at 5th place is the comic book series Saga by Brian K. Vaughan and Fiona Staples. If you're unfamiliar with this comic book series, it is definitely one of the best series right now being written in the comic book industry, and is being led by Brian K. Vaughan, who is well known for his Y the Last Man series. The art in this comic book series Saga is just so absolutely imaginative and vivid, and really brings out the creativity in this story that Brian K. Vaughan is able to create in his head. He claims he wrote this thing long ago as a kid and has just been developing it since, and is now finally putting it to pages. And honestly, I'm so thankful for it, because this is such a beautiful and gorgeous comic book series. It is honestly one of the best right now, by far. The best way to describe this is that it is this massive sci-fi sprawling epic that really feels like if you took Romeo and Juliet and mixed it in with something like Game of Thrones and Star Wars. It is that epic and that huge in scale, as it is a love story that spans over just decades throughout the main character's life. It is so gorgeous, and I highly recommend this to get into comic book series. I don't think there is a better comic book series right now being written that could really just throw you into the world of comics like this one. And this, of course, is also a 9 out of 10. It's unfinished, and it is on hiatus, but it is due to return soon. Coming in at the 4th spot is Kurt Vonnegut's Bluebeard, which I read in early 2020, and I am a huge Kurt Vonnegut fan. One of my favorite books of all time is Cat's Cradle, so I was just eager to jump right into this thing. It is a fictional autobiography about this character named Rabo Karabekian, and he is this old weltering man in his 70s, I believe. Yes, 71. And he is also an artist who didn't show a lot of his work to the world. And honestly, as this book unfolds, you really see a glimpse into this man's life who really just misunderstood a lot of things. This artist has a lot of secrets kept away, and he is approached by this young widow who pretty much forces him to tell his life story. And in doing so, it reveals a lot about the main character, and also reveals a lot about, I think, how most men in general sort of work. This book is full of satire and is very comedic, but at the same time is extremely thought-provoking, extremely real, and very raw. The climax of this book as well is one that I have not forgotten since I put this book down, and it is definitely easily one of my favorite books of the last year, especially for the climax alone. It is truly a fantastic read. It's short too, at only about 200 pages, and really does a fantastic job at really delving into the mind of this man, a rather typical man, I should say. With that being said, this book gets a 9 out of 10, very close to a 10. Coming in at number 3 is 11/22/63 by Stephen King. It is the second Stephen King book I read this year, and is a massive 800-page epic about Jake Epping, a teacher from 2011 who travels back in time through a pantry to the early 1960s and has to stop the assassination of JFK, which is exactly as ridiculous as it sounds, but it is definitely also one of Stephen King's very best. And even though this seems like it is truly about JFK, this is more about the love story that takes place from about halfway through onwards, as that really does begin to take priority as you see Jake Epping sort of battle between love and also saving JFK, the President of the United States. And even though Stephen King is a pretty straightforward writer, there isn't too much deep philosophical things to really take from this. It is just an extremely entertaining read, easily one of my favorite Stephen King books ever written, if not my favorite, period. And a friend of mine actually gave this to me, and honestly I'm so glad that she did, because this is one of the best reads I had in 2020. It was so much fun, and I read it pretty quickly too, considering the length of this thing. This book gets a 9 out of 10 as well. Only 2 books left, and at my number 2 spot is another Kurt Vonnegut book, Sirens of Titan, which is about this man, Malachi Constant, who is offered pretty much this chance of a lifetime to go to Mars. And not just go to Mars, he goes to Mars with a beautiful woman at his side and is able to pretty much venture out and discover the meaning of life and what this all truly means. And honestly, Kurt Vonnegut handles this in the most Vonnegut way possible. It is full of satire. It is extremely funny. There's so much comedy spliced into every single line here, and I feel like you just get so much out of every single chapter. I love this book, but I have to say that it gets pretty depressing towards the end, but depressingly good. I never really knew where this book was going. I had no idea where it was going to end up, and the twists that it goes on are really shocking to me. I just did not expect them in any way whatsoever. This book deals with the meaning of life and the matter of free will, and if we ever really have any of that at all. There's also a dog in here, so that's also a plus. If there was a Vonnegut book I would recommend to people, this is one of his earlier works and does capture the spirit of Kurt Vonnegut quite well. Although I'd still recommend Cat's Cradle. Please read that. 9 out of 10. And coming in at my number 1 spot, my favorite book that I read in 2020, by far a 10 in my eyes, a perfect 10 out of 10. There is nothing wrong with this book. Every single page is just pure, absolute poetry in my eyes, and really creates this gorgeous world. It is so immersive and just so incredibly visceral with the story that is being told here. And the book I of course am talking about is Musashi by Eiji Yoshikawa. Now if this sounds like I already talked about it, it's because Vagabond is actually based on this book, but that isn't finished, whereas this is, and this is also a far better telling of it in my opinion. To quickly summarize, this book is about Miyamoto Musashi from the 1600s, the world's greatest samurai, the greatest samurai we've ever actually seen in general, and pretty much details his life from this massive battle that he fought in and managed to survive all by his lonesome next to his friend Matahachi. And then after this battle, Musashi separates from Matahachi and goes on his own journey, his spiritual journey, to figure out who he is and his place in this world as a samurai. You pretty much see him go on this very philosophical and deep spiritual journey as he goes on to fight all these different types of samurais and also battles all these massive samurai schools. And perhaps the greatest, most well-known moment of Miyamoto Musashi's entire life was when he fought this other samurai known as Sasaki Kojiro. And this battle takes place all the way up to the very last page of this 940 page epic. There is so much that I can really talk about with this book because it is not just about fighting, it is not just about samurais, it is also a story about friendship, it is also equally a story about love and deciding between your passion or the girl of your dreams, which Musashi constantly has to battle between. And honestly, these samurai fights really aren't the best thing about it. The best thing about it is the atmosphere. Personally, I read this thing in the springtime, and reading this out in that beautiful weather really brought me to this Japanese world. There's a really fantastic love story that also carries throughout, and also just so many incredible fleshed out characters that Musashi meets in his life, and he goes on to either fight them, train them, befriend them, begin to hate them. Honestly, you get every range of Musashi here as he goes on this journey. And the ending, I don't want to spoil it because it's such a long book, but the ending has one of the most genius moments I've ever seen any character do. 10 out of 10. This is a perfect book in my eyes. That pretty much does it for this video. There's definitely going to be more book-related, literature-related content going forward, more music-related content, maybe some movies and TV show-related content at some point, but primarily book and music-focused content. If this video gets 5 likes, I will shave off this greasy mustache.